Welcome to the first video in a three-part series dedicated to VMware Site Recovery Manager. We're going to start this first video by giving you an overview of the Site Recovery Manager product and explaining what its benefits and core terminology concepts are. In our second video, we'll step through the creation of protection groups, inventory mappings, and a recovery plan. And in our final video, we'll actually walk you through a demonstration of a recovery plan in action. If we take a look at a very basic architecture for SRM, we'll notice that we have a protected site and a recovery site. We call the protected site the place where the virtual machines exist that we wish to protect. A protected site requires a virtual center server, a site recovery manager server, and Datastore Groups. Datastore Groups are groups of data stores that house the virtual machines contained within their respective protection groups. If we look at the recovery site, we also must have a virtual center server, a site recovery manager server, and the coexisting data store groups relative to the virtual machines that we're protecting. As we zoom out on this slide, we see array replication at the bottom. Array replication is the fundamental method of transport that actually allows the virtual machines to get from the protected site to the recovery site. Storage vendors that have certified their storage array have provided to us storage replication adapters, or SRAs, that allow Site Recovery Manager to interact directly with the array. These are pieces of software that are installed on both Site Recovery Manager servers located at the protected site and the recovery site, and allow Site Recovery Manager to tell the array to make the correct modifications when necessary to the storage, so that if in the event that you're executing a failover or you're testing a recovery plan, the appropriate actions can be taken. In the 1.0 release, we do support bidirectional failover, meaning that you can failover from the protected site to the recovery site and vice versa. If you have virtual machines located at the recovery site, you could have a failover and actually recover those virtual machines at the protected site. If we talk a little bit about how this product actually works, one of the first things that we do once we've established communication between the sites is creating a protection group. Protection group is a group of protected VMs. Once SRM protects those VMs, it creates shadow VMs at the recovery site. A shadow VM is nothing more than a stub of information that is provided to Virtual Center so that Virtual Center can have that virtual machine added to the inventory and will be able to power that virtual machine on as part of the recovery plan. The virtual machines as they stand will never be allowed to power on by a user. They can only be powered on by the actual recovery plan. Now let's take a look over at the VI client and we can see a little bit more about the actual site recovery interface. You'll notice that the Site Recovery button is already installed, the plugin, and we did that by going up to Plugins and Manage Plugins and downloading and installing the client once the Site Recovery Manager server had been installed. Once the plugin was installed, it was enabled by clicking on the Install tab and checking the box to enable it and clicking on OK. Once we've installed the plugin, we can activate the Site Recovery interface by clicking on the Site Recovery button. What you'll notice here is that there are a lot of information that's present. You'll notice the protected site and the recovery site. It gives you the important IP information for the Virtual Center server and the SRM servers. It also shows you that the array manager has been previously configured, inventory mappings have been configured, and that there's one protection group. In our case, the protection group is called Virtual Desktops. Now let's look at our recovery site. Notice we have the plugin already installed for Site Recovery. We have a single ESX host that has a couple of running virtual machines, and it has two shadow VMs. The shadow VMs are XP01 and XP02. Notice that those shadow VMs sit on shared shadow VMFS storage. When we actually double click on the shadow VMFS data store and look at the contents, we'll notice that this is not a complete virtual machine. It only contains the VMX information or the core contents of the virtual machine and its resources. When we expand recovery plans, we see that we have a single recovery plan, and in this case it's called the Virtual Desktop Recovery Plan. Now let's jump back to the slide for a second just to continue talking about how SRM works. So we have our protected VMs, and in the event of a catastrophic failure and those protected VMs become unavailable, we're actually able to initiate the recovery plan from the recovery site. At the time that the recovery plan is initiated, SRM will talk down to the array and will actually present the storage that houses the most recent copy of the virtual machines to the ESX servers contained in the virtual infrastructure on the recovery site. At this point, ESX will then power on the virtual machines and allow them to be available and online in the recovery site. So let's talk about some key concepts. We have the protected site, or again, the site where the protected VMs originate, the recovery site, the site in which the VMs are replicated to, the storage replication adapter, that was the piece of software that allows SRM to interact with the storage array. A protection group is a group of VMs that will be failed over together at the secondary site. And a Datastore group, again, is those replicated LUNs containing completed sets of virtual machines. The next set of concepts we need to talk about is the shadow VM. I mentioned that earlier, but just to reiterate, a shadow VM is the stub of information that actually contains enough information to allow that particular virtual machine to be added to the Virtual Center inventory located at the recovery site. Your inventory mappings are associations between the primary resource pools, folders, and networks, and their destination counterparts at the secondary site. And of course, the recovery plan is the completed set of steps needed to recovery or test. And when you're establishing your recovery plan, this is where you're going to spend the bulk of your configuration time, implementing all of those steps and adding all of those manual steps to this recovery plan. We have a pretty conclusive recovery plan editor that we'll talk about in a later video and go into more detail. The next thing I'd like to talk about is SRN concepts and their relationships. So here we see we have multiple LUNs, and those multiple LUNs house VMFS volumes, and those VMFS volumes have virtual machines on them. So we've talked about Datastore Groups a couple times, and I just want to make sure I clarify what that means. If I have a group of virtual machines, a Datastore group would consist of all of the data stores that would house all the virtual disks related to those virtual machines. So in this example, I can see that I could have three distinct Datastore groups. Datastore group number 1 would house the virtual machines on a single VMFS volume on a single LUN, while Datastore group number 2 would house virtual machines on a VMFS volume that sits across multiple LUNs, and Datastore group number 3 would be a VM that has multiple virtual disks sitting on multiple LUNs. So as you can see, those Datastore groups have relative protection groups that are associated with them. Now when we think about creating recovery plans, a recovery plan can contain one or more protection groups. So recovery plan number 1 might be your entire site, meaning it would contain all 3 of your protection groups here in this example. You also may have a secondary recovery plan that contains a subset, or maybe only protection group number 1. As we return over to the VI client on the protected side, we'll talk a little bit more about our protection group. Our protection group is called Virtual Desktops. By highlighting Virtual Desktops, we can click on the Virtual Machines tab and we can see the VMs that are protected in this protection group, XP01 and XP02, and their associated inventory mappings on the protected side. By clicking on Summary, we can see that the status is OK, and what this means is that this protection group has been successfully communicated over to the recovery side. If we go to the recovery site, we'll notice that we have a single recovery plan called Virtual Desktop Recovery Plan, as indicated by the number of recovery plans equaling 1. When we highlight that Virtual Desktop Recovery Plan, we can then click on the Virtual Machines tab and indeed see that those 2 VMs are included in this recovery plan and their associated inventory mappings. By clicking on Recovery Steps, this allows us to see all of the steps that are contained in the Virtual Desktop Recovery Plan. Now VMware has included a nice set of steps initially to get you started in order to conduct a basic failover. There's a lot of configuration and a lot of editing that can be done in this field. Way too much to cover in this video. So please join us in our next video as we continue down this path of helping you understand how easy it is to create a protection group, set your inventory preferences, and create a recovery plan, as well as some of the cool features that you can add into your recovery plan. I hope this video has been informative for you, and thank you for watching.